They said no one survives 21 days without water, but we did. And I know now it wasn't because of strength or chance. It was because heaven had already marked that desert. Before our suffering began, the answer was already written in the wind. And what happened out there, what I saw with my own eyes, still haunts me. Every night I close them. Because when heaven intervenes, it doesn't whisper, it thunders. My name is Elias Rahim, and this is what happened when 7 missionaries disappeared in the deserts of Afghanistan. I didn't plan to tell this story. Some memories burn too deep, and some miracles feel too sacred to speak aloud. But silence has a way of turning into guilt, and lately, every time I wake up before dawn, I hear the wind again. It sounds the same, like it did on the first day when everything changed. We were 7. Ordinary people with fragile faith, carrying medicine, food, and hope through the southern valleys. Kandahar behind us, coast ahead. We'd traveled this path before, but that time the air felt heavier. There's a silence in Afghanistan you never forget. It isn't peace, it's the pause before the storm. That morning, the sun rose red over the hills. It painted the rocks like fire, the air dry enough to sting your lungs. We loaded our jeep, prayed quietly, and started moving east. The road was a narrow trail between sand and stone. On both sides, nothing but emptiness. We sang softly, a way to keep fear small. But halfway through the valley, I felt it. That strange pull in the chest, like something unseen was watching. Then it happened. A crack in the distance. Gunfire, then another. Before we could breathe, 3 trucks appeared from nowhere, cutting across the path. Men stepped out, faces covered, rifles raised. They shouted, waved us down, their words sharp like blades. I remember the dust spinning in circles around their feet, the taste of metal in my mouth, the world suddenly very still. We didn't resist. There was no point. They dragged us out, stripped the vehicle, blindfolded our eyes. Someone whispered the word spies. I wanted to shout, we're missionaries, but fear glued my throat shut. The sound of rope tightening around my wrists echoed louder than my heartbeat. Then came the shove, the stumble, the fall into heat and sand. Hours passed, maybe days. I couldn't tell. We walked blind, bound, sun scorching our necks. The world smelled like dust and sweat, every step heavier than the last. When the blindfold finally came off, I saw nothing but endless desert. No horizon, no mercy, just the sound of wind moving through emptiness. They left us there. No food, no water. Just the 7 of us, sitting in the open like forgotten bones of the earth. At first, we prayed, but as the hours turned to nights, the prayers grew shorter. By the 5th day, my lips cracked until they bled. By the 7th, one of us fainted. We tore a piece of his shirt, pressed it to his mouth, hoping for dew. Nothing. It's strange what happens to faith when your throat burns dry. The verses you once recited so easily become questions instead. Why God? Why us? Why now? But somewhere between the anger and the silence came a whisper. Not outside, inside. A memory, maybe? Or something more. It said, hold on, the desert is not the end. That was the first night I stopped being afraid. The stars stretched so close above us, I felt like I could touch heaven itself. And deep down, I sensed something was coming. Not rescue, not chance. Something divine. By the 9th day, the ground began to shimmer with heat. We took turns standing watch, though we had nothing to defend. Sometimes, in the distance, I thought I saw figures walking shadows in the haze. But when I blinked, they vanished. On the 12th day, the wind carried a sound like faint singing. It wasn't real. It couldn't be. Yet all 7 of us heard it. A voice, far and soft, moving through the dunes like smoke. We didn't speak of it. We just listened, and for a few moments, the thirst disappeared. Then came the 20th night. The air was cold, sharper than usual. I couldn't sleep. Every thought ran in circles. I closed my eyes and whispered, God, if you are still here, give us water or give us rest. When I opened them, I saw something glinting near a flat stone. I crawled closer, every muscle screaming. There, shining faintly under moonlight, were drops of dew, 7 of them, just enough for each of us. I don't know how long I cried. It wasn't about the water. It was the message. Someone was listening. Someone had always been listening. The next morning, the horizon changed. A sandstorm rolled toward us, vast, roaring, impossible to escape. We huddled together, covered our faces, shouted prayers into the wind. It felt like the sky itself was tearing open. And just before everything went black, I heard it. A voice, calm, steady, calling my name. 3 times. Elias, Elias, Elias. And that was the moment heaven intervened. When I woke that morning, the sky was already pale. There was no sound of birds, no call from the nearby villages, only the hum of the wind moving through stone and dust. I sat by the jeep, rubbing the sleep from my eyes, watching the horizon glow. Something in the air felt strange. Still, heavy, like the world was holding its breath. Mina handed me a piece of dry bread, said we should move before the sun got stronger. Her voice was small, almost swallowed by the wind. We loaded the last of the supplies, a crate of medicine, a few canisters of water, and a box of handwritten letters we had promised to deliver. 7 of us in total, each with a different reason to believe, but the same faith binding us together. I remember looking back one last time before we left the old village behind. The people waved as we disappeared into the dust. I didn't know then it would be the last human kindness we'd see for weeks. The road was rough, carved through layers of sand and broken rock. Our driver Yusuf kept one hand steady on the wheel, his other resting on the worn Bible tucked beside him. He hummed softly under his breath a hymn from his childhood. It was the only sound we heard for miles, the kind that comforts you until silence swallows it whole. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher. The heat pressed against our skin like punishment. We joked about the weather, about home, about the food we missed. Little things to pretend life was still normal. But deep down, something inside me whispered we were being watched. It began with a shadow, a small shape moving along the ridge to our right, then another, and another. At first I thought they were shepherds, but shepherds don't carry rifles. Keep driving, I said quietly. Yusuf nodded, his eyes locked on the road. The others fell silent. Only the engine spoke. Then, without warning, the sound, a crack, a single shot echoing across the valley. It wasn't close, not yet, but it was enough. We knew they'd found us. Yusuf pressed the pedal. The jeep shuddered as it leapt forward. Dust exploded behind us, heat waves blurring the horizon. In the mirror, 3 trucks, old military models, painted and camouflaged, their engines roaring like thunder. They were closing in fast. We shouted, prayed, shouted again. But prayer doesn't make an engine faster. Bullets hit the ground beside us, spitting dust. One shattered the side mirror. Another tore through the back seat. Mina screamed, clutching her arm. Not blood, but shock. The air filled with the metallic scent of fear. "Turn off the road!" I shouted. Yusuf swerved sharply to the left into the open desert. The tires sank deep into soft sand. The engine groaned, wheels spinning uselessly. We were trapped. The trucks surrounded us in seconds. Men jumped out, faces wrapped in cloth, their voices sharp and commanding. I couldn't understand the words, but I knew the tone authority born of violence. One of them hit the hood with his rifle, shouting for us to get out. I raised my hands, stepped into the burning light. The sand beneath my feet felt like fire. They shouted questions, names, origin, reason for being there. We answered, voice trembling. "We're missionaries," I said. The man's eyes narrowed. Then he laughed, a sound colder than the desert wind. He muttered something to the others, then pointed his weapon at the sky and fired once. It was a signal. Within minutes, more armed men appeared from the dunes. The smell of diesel and sweat filled the air. They searched the jeep, tearing open every bag, scattering medicine and Bibles into the sand. One of them picked up a photo from my pocket, my wife and daughter. He looked at it, then at me. Without a word, he dropped it back into the dirt and walked away. They tied our wrists with coarse rope, blindfolded our eyes, and pushed us toward the trucks. I heard Mina crying softly, Tariq whispering prayers under his breath. Every sound felt magnified, the scrape of boots, the clatter of rifles, the distant cry of a hawk above us. I tried to memorize the direction of the sun on my skin, the tilt of the vehicle when they shoved me inside. I thought maybe if I survived, I could find my way back. But survival wasn't in their plan. As the trucks roared to life, a deep rumble filled the air. The smell of fuel mixed with sweat and dust. I heard one of them laugh again. He said something in Pashto. I didn't understand the words then, but later I learned it meant they will beg the sand for water. The journey felt endless. Heat pressing through the metal roof, every breath burning. I could hear Yusuf coughing beside me, whispering verses from memory. At one point, I thought I heard Mina faint. I called her name, no reply. Silence again. The kind that eats away at hope, one heartbeat at a time. When they finally stopped, I felt a change in the air. Cooler. Higher elevation, maybe? Someone yanked me out, tore the blindfold from my eyes. The sun hit me so hard, I fell to my knees. And what I saw around me made my stomach twist. A ravine narrow, steep, filled with broken stone and thorn. No trees, no paths, no escape. They dragged us down into it, one by one, until we were hidden from the world. That's when I realized this wasn't about ransom. It was about erasing us. One of them shoved me against a rock, his face inches from mine. He didn't speak. He just stared, eyes dark, empty, unshaken. Then he smiled. Not the smile of a man amused, the smile of someone certain he holds the power of life and death. And in that moment, I understood. We weren't prisoners. We were offerings. That night, they tied our hands behind our backs and left us lying in the open beneath a moonless sky. The air was still cold. Every sound sharper, the shuffle of boots, the click of rifles, the hiss of wind through dry grass. I thought of home, of my daughter's laughter, of promises I had made and never kept. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't sure if prayer would reach that far. Still, I whispered it. Not because I believed, but because silence felt worse. The wind changed sometime after midnight. It carried sand like needles, stinging every inch of skin left exposed. I couldn't move my hands, couldn't shield my face. All I could do was listen to the sound of Mina breathing somewhere close, to the quiet sob of Yusuf, to my own heart pounding too loud inside my chest. Somewhere in that darkness, I felt a shift, a presence, not of the men guarding us, but something else. The kind of silence that listens back. It's strange how your senses sharpen when you believe you're about to die. Every grain of sand, every gust of wind felt alive. Then, footsteps, soft, measured. I turned my head, expecting another blow. but it wasn't one of them. A faint glimmer moved across the ridge, just above us, like a lantern caught in the wind. Too steady to be a mirage, too real to ignore. I blinked, and it was gone. Only darkness again. When dawn came, the guards untied us, shouting commands, forcing us to stand. My legs trembled. The air already thick with heat, the sky turning white before the sun even rose. They pushed us into a line, handed out rough cloths to cover our heads, and motioned for us to walk. No words, no destination, just walk. We climbed for hours through dry hills, stones cutting our feet, lips cracking from thirst. Every breath hurt. The air itself felt sharp, like glass inside our lungs. At times I thought about falling, letting the sand swallow me whole. But then I'd hear a voice, Yusuf's, whispering psalms, Mina humming under her breath. Tiny sounds of fate refusing to die. By midday, the heat was unbearable. Our shadows vanished beneath us, the ground shimmering like liquid fire. The guards stopped, argued among themselves, then ordered us to sit beneath a cluster of broken rocks. No shade, but enough to keep the wind off. One of them tossed a small canteen at us. Empty. He laughed and walked away. That laugh, it still echoes in me. Hours passed. No one spoke. The silence between us felt like a prayer too tired to finish. My throat felt like sandpaper, my tongue swollen. I thought about the mission, the families waiting, the people who believed we'd bring hope. What would they think if they saw us now? 7 believers staring at the sky, waiting for nothing. But faith doesn't die easily. It trembles, it questions, it breaks apart in pieces. But somewhere in those pieces, a spark remains. When night fell again, the temperature dropped sharply. Cold crept into our bones, but we welcomed it. It numbed the thirst. We huddled together for warmth, listening to the guards speaking in low tones around their fire. The smell of smoke, of roasting meat, drifted toward us. We hadn't eaten in 2 days. Yusuf whispered that maybe they would give us scraps when they were done. They didn't. That night, I closed my eyes and tried to remember the sound of rain, the soft patter on the roof of my home, the smell of earth after a storm. I imagined the water running over my hands, and I prayed again, not for rescue, this time, just for one drop. I must have fallen asleep. Because when I woke, the sky was gray, and the guards were gone. Only the wind remained. It howled through the ravine like a living thing, lifting waves of dust into the air. I looked around. The others were still there, motionless, heads bowed. For a moment, I thought we'd been abandoned. Then a voice broke the silence. Move. They were back, armed, angry. One of them kicked Yusuf's leg, shouting. We stood, trembling, unsure of what we'd done wrong. Then I saw it, a tire track leading out of the ravine. The Jeep. They had buried it in sand and were digging it out. One of them motioned for us to climb in the back. No explanation, just a new direction. The engine roared to life, coughing black smoke. We drove for hours, bouncing over stones and dunes, until the ground leveled into a wide, flat plain. Nothing but endless horizon in every direction. The air shimmered with heat, the color of iron and ash. That's when I realized they weren't taking us anywhere. They were leaving us. They stopped the truck, ordered us out, and cut the ropes from our wrists. One man pointed to the distance, a faint ridge barely visible in the haze. He said something sharp, then spat into the sand. I caught one word, walk. And then they drove away. We stood there, 7 figures in the middle of nothing, the sound of engines fading into the wind. I watched until they were gone, until even the dust they left behind disappeared. Then it hit me. We were alone. No compass, no map, no water, no hope. For a long time, no one spoke. The sun climbed higher, burning the ground beneath our feet. Yusuf fell to his knees, whispering scripture through cracked lips. Mina cried quietly, her tears drying before they touched her chin. And I stared at the ridge they had pointed to. Something about it felt wrong, as if even the desert refused to claim it. Still, we started walking, because what else could we do? Every step was pain, every breath a reminder of what we'd lost. The silence around us was so heavy, I could hear my heartbeat echo through my skull. As night returned, the sky filled with stars, sharp, brilliant, endless. I looked up and whispered, "If you're still there, please don't let this be the end." No answer, only wind. But deep down, beneath the fear, beneath the exhaustion, something stirred. A sense that this desert wasn't empty, that we had been brought here not by mistake, but by design. And somewhere beyond the horizon, something was waiting. That was the last night before the real trial began. Before thirst became our prayer, and heaven began to listen. Morning came without warning. The sun didn't rise. It exploded, flooding the horizon with light so harsh it felt like fire. My eyes burned, my skin cracked, and the air itself seemed to hiss. We had nothing left to shade ourselves, no food, no water, just the clothes on our backs and the ache in our bones. The ridge they'd pointed to the day before still looked distant. No matter how far we walked, it stayed the same, a ghost on the horizon, never closer, never gone. We moved in silence. The sound of footsteps crunching against sand was the only rhythm we had left. Yusuf led the way, whispering verses beneath his breath. His lips were swollen, voice rasping like sandpaper. Each word came out heavy, but steady. He said the desert was testing our faith. I didn't answer because I wasn't sure if mine was still alive. By noon, the heat turned unbearable. It pressed on us from all sides, above, below, within. Every breath scraped our throats raw. We tried not to speak. Talking only made the thirst worse. I could feel my heartbeat slowing, my head light, my vision swimming in waves of light. Mina stumbled first. Her legs buckled, and she fell face first into the sand. We rushed to her, lifting her by the arms, but she could barely open her eyes. Her lips were bleeding. She whispered something I couldn't hear. Then her head dropped against my shoulder, limp. We laid her down gently. Yusuf took her hand, praying over her. The rest of us just watched, waiting for a miracle. But miracles don't come fast in the desert. Sometimes they crawl. We tore a piece of cloth from her sleeve, hoping to soak dew if it came. The air was dry, unforgiving. Even the wind refused to help. I looked up, searching the horizon for any sign of life, a bird, a movement, a shadow, but there was nothing. Only the endless stretch of dust and stone, glowing white under a merciless sun. That's when the sound started. A low hum, deep and distant. At first I thought it was thunder, but thunder doesn't echo in waves. It was my own pulse pounding inside my skull. I was fading. We walked again, step by step, one foot dragging after the other. I counted every 50 steps, then stopped to breathe. By the 7th count, my tongue felt too thick to move. When I tried to swallow, it felt like shards of glass in my throat. At dusk, the sky turned red, the color of dried blood. We found a small hollow between two dunes, shelter from the wind, nothing more. The sand there was cooler, softer. We collapsed together, exhausted beyond speech. No one lit a fire. We had nothing to burn. We just sat in silence, staring at the fading light, each lost inside our own private prayers. I remember watching the first star appear. It flickered faintly, as if even the heavens struggled to breathe above us. Something about that sight broke me. I felt tears rising, but there was nothing left to cry. Even grief had dried up. That night, I dreamed of water. Not rivers or rain, but a single drop, falling from somewhere unseen, landing on my palm, glowing like glass in moonlight. When I woke, my hand was still open, trembling, but it was empty. The next day came like a punishment. Hotter, heavier, the kind of heat that presses you into the earth. We started walking again before sunrise. By mid-morning, the sand began to blur beneath our feet. I felt my knees giving way, but I forced myself to keep moving. I didn't want to be the next to fall. Sometime around midday, Yusuf stopped walking. He stood perfectly still, staring at something far ahead. I followed his gaze, but there was nothing. Only the desert. He whispered, "Do you see him?" I frowned, confused. There on the ridge. I squinted. The air shimmered, twisting shapes out of heat and light. At first I thought it was a mirage. But then I saw it too. A man, tall, dressed in white, standing motionless against the sun. No footprints around him. No shadow. Just stillness. We froze. None of us dared to blink. The figure didn't move, but somehow I knew it was looking right at us. A strange calm washed through me like cool air in my lungs, like peace in the middle of chaos. Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, it was gone. Vanished. The ridge empty once more. No one spoke for a long time. Finally, Mina whispered, "We're not alone." And for the first time in days, I believed her. That night, something changed. The wind softened, the air felt different, warmer, almost gentle. We lay beneath the stars, too weak to speak, but too awake to sleep. In the distance, faint lights flickered, maybe fires, maybe illusions. None of us cared. We just watched, breathing shallow, waiting for something, anything. Somewhere in that silence, I felt it again. The same presence from the night of our capture. Not a voice, not a sound, just awareness. It filled the air, thick and invisible, wrapping around us like unseen hands. And deep in my heart, I heard it, not words, but meaning. "You are seen." I turned my face toward the sky, and for a moment, the stars didn't look distant. They looked alive. By dawn, the wind had changed again. Cooler this time, softer. It brushed across my face like a breath. When I opened my eyes, the sky was pale gold, and the desert around us shimmered under that quiet light. For a moment, it almost looked beautiful. Then the thirst came back, sharp, unforgiving. We rose slowly, our bodies heavy, our thoughts heavier. Every joint ached, every movement scraped against exhaustion. The ridge still stood ahead of us, untouched, unreal. No closer than it had been the day before. Still, we walked, because stopping felt like dying with our eyes open. Hours passed. The sun climbed high. The air throbbed with heat, the sand burning through the soles of our shoes. No one spoke. Speech had become a luxury we couldn't afford. Every breath had to count, every step had to matter. By midday, the ground began to twist beneath us, not physically, but in sight. Heat waves rippled the horizon, bending light, creating illusions of water. At one point, Mina gasped and pointed. A lake glimmering not far ahead. We ran, or tried to. Every step we took, it shifted further away. By the time we reached it, there was nothing, just more sand, more heat, more despair. We fell to our knees. No strength left to curse, no tears left to shed. Just silence. The kind of silence that feels like the end of everything. Yusuf was the first to pray again. His voice cracked, his words slurred, but still he prayed. Not for rescue, not anymore. He prayed for forgiveness, for faith to hold out longer than our bodies could. The rest of us just listened, heads bowed, hearts barely beating. There was something about his prayer, a rhythm that sounded less like words and more like surrender, When the sun finally dipped low, the world turned golden red. The air cooled enough for us to breathe again. We lay side by side on the sand, staring at the sky. No one spoke, but I could feel the same thought running through all of us. If this was where we would die, would anyone ever know? I closed my eyes, and somewhere between waking and sleep, I felt something. A vibration, faint at first, like footsteps in the distance, then closer, heavier. I sat up, scanning the darkness, heart pounding, nothing, only the wind. But it didn't sound the same anymore. It whispered, not with words, but meaning. Something was moving in it, alive, watching. I lay back down, forcing my eyes shut, whispering, "If it's you, don't let us die like this." The wind paused, then shifted, and for a heartbeat, I thought I heard an answer, not a voice, but a pulse inside the silence. You're not alone. That night, I dreamed again. I was standing in the same desert, but the sand glowed faintly, like gold under moonlight. The air was calm, almost holy. And before me stood that same figure in white, distant, faceless, radiant. He didn't move, but somehow I knew he was waiting for me. I tried to walk toward him, but my legs wouldn't move. Then his hand lifted, slowly, pointing to the sky. I looked up, 7 stars, aligned in a perfect curve above me. They pulsed once, then faded. When I looked back down, he was gone, and I woke up with tears on my face. The others were still sleeping, breathing shallow, skin pale under the faint light of dawn. But the sand beside me, it was wet, just a patch small as my palm. Darkened, cool. I pressed my hand into it and felt moisture. Real water. Not much, not enough to drink, but enough to know it was there. I looked up, scanning the sky, but there were no clouds. No dew. Nothing. Only that small patch of wet sand, glistening under the early light. I woke Yusuf, showed him the spot. He stared at it for a long moment, eyes wide, then whispered, "He's heard us." The others gathered close, each touching the sand as if it were holy. We pressed the fabric from our sleeves into it, wringing out the faint trace of moisture we could gather. It wasn't enough to quench the thirst, but it was enough to keep hope alive. That night, the wind rose again, not violent, just restless. It circled us like a living thing. In it, I could hear faint tones, like fragments of a song, low, distant, almost human. It made the hair on my arms stand up. We looked at one another, too weak to speak, too awed to move. No one said it aloud, but we all knew this was no ordinary wind. And then it began to change. A cool breeze swept over us, carrying the scent of something impossible: water. Real water. It drifted through the air, soft and sweet. I thought I was imagining it until I heard Mina gasp. She pointed toward the darkness beyond the dunes. There, glimmering faintly, a reflection, like moonlight on still water. We stumbled toward it, half crawling, half falling. Every step burned, every breath hurt. But the closer we got, the stronger the scent became. When we reached the hollow between 2 dunes, we stopped. A shallow pool lay there, no deeper than a footprint, no wider than a doorway. But it was real. Water, shimmering under the pale moonlight. We fell to our knees. Some drank, some cried. I just sat there, staring, because I knew this wasn't natural. The ground around it was dry, untouched. No source, no reason, just grace. As I cupped my hands and drank, a shiver ran through me. The water was cold, impossibly cold, and in that coldness, I felt peace. For the first time since our capture, I wasn't afraid. I closed my eyes, whispering, "Thank you." And in the wind that followed, I swear I heard a whisper back. Soft, gentle, The desert remembers. That night, none of us spoke. We just sat together, staring at the stars, reflected in that small pool of water, and for the first time, hope didn't feel like a lie. It felt like a promise. The pool was gone by morning, vanished. The sand where it had been was dry, cracked, untouched, as if water had never existed there at all. But the taste still lingered on my tongue, cool, pure, undeniable. We stared at the emptiness, too stunned to speak. It wasn't a dream. It couldn't have been. 7 of us had seen it. 7 had touched the same miracle, and now it was gone. Yusuf knelt beside the spot, pressing his palms into the dry sand. His lips moved, whispering a prayer too soft to hear. Mina just stood there, silent, staring at the sky. Her face looked different, calmer, but older somehow, like she'd seen something she couldn't name. I wanted to believe the miracle meant deliverance was near, but the heat came back stronger that day. Cruel, almost mocking. By noon, the wind had died, leaving the air still and suffocating. The horizon rippled with fire. Every step burned. We walked east, or what we thought was east, following the memory of the ridge. But no matter how far we went, it stayed the same distance away. Endless. Unmoving. Like a mirage painted on the edge of heaven. By the 3rd hour, Mina collapsed again. Her breathing shallow, her eyes half open. We stopped, tried to lift her, but she pushed us away. "Leave me," she whispered, voice hoarse, barely sound at all. "No," I said, shaking my head. "We're not leaving anyone." She smiled weakly. "Maybe he didn't bring all of us out of Egypt. Just some." Then her eyes rolled back, and she went still. We poured the last drops of our dew-soaked cloth onto her lips. She didn't move. No breath. No pulse. Just stillness. Yusuf fell beside her, crying. The others turned away. I stood there, staring at her face, willing her to breathe again. Nothing. The silence pressed down on us until I couldn't bear it anymore. I shouted into the wind, "Is this how you answer?" My voice cracked, echoing through the empty hills. Was it mercy just to watch her die slower? The desert swallowed my words whole. No echo, no reply, just heat and silence. I dropped to my knees, fists clenched in the sand. My vision blurred not from tears, but from fury. I had spent my life preaching faith, and now it felt like mockery. Was this what God wanted? 7 broken believers dying one by one in a forgotten wasteland? But even in that anger, something inside me trembled. Not from fear, from shame, because somewhere deep down, a voice whispered, "Keep watching." We buried Mina in the sand as best we could. A shallow grave marked with a small cross made from sticks. The wind kept erasing it as fast as we built it. I pressed my hand against the mound and whispered, "I'll tell them what you saw." I didn't know who I was talking to, her or God. Maybe both. That night, the desert changed again. The air thickened, the sky bruised into violet and red. Lightning flickered far off, silent flashes tearing across the horizon. There was no thunder, only the light and the stillness that followed. Yusuf said maybe it was a sign. Abdul said it was a warning. I didn't know what to call it anymore. All I knew was that something was coming. We huddled together in the hollow of a dune, covering our faces from the rising wind. Sand whipped against us, stinging our skin. The temperature dropped sharply, the air charged electric, unnatural, and then came the sound, low, vibrating through the ground. Not thunder, not wind, something deeper, like a heartbeat pulsing through the earth. It grew louder, closer, until the ground itself began to tremble. We looked around, terrified, searching for the source, but there was nothing, only the sound, moving in waves, wrapping around us. It wasn't chaos, it was rhythm, like the earth itself was breathing. I pressed my hand into the sand. It was warm, and then suddenly cold. Ice cold. I jerked back, staring as a faint glow began to spread under the surface, blue and gold, like veins of light running through the dunes. Yusuf gasped. The others fell to their knees, praying aloud. The light pulsed once, then faded. Silence again. We didn't move for a long time. None of us spoke. Because deep down we knew. We had just witnessed something holy. Something beyond explanation. When the night finally settled, the air grew calm again. We lay on the sand, staring at the sky, minds blank, hearts too full. And then just as sleep began to take me, I heard her voice, Mina's, soft, clear, calling my name, not from the earth, but from above. I sat up, eyes wide, scanning the stars. Nothing. But the voice came again, faint and melodic, carried by the wind. Elias. Once, then again, Elias. The others were asleep. The night still, only the faint glow of the stars watching. I whispered back, "What do you want from me?" No answer. Just the sound of sand shifting nearby. I turned and froze. Footprints. Fresh, leading away from the camp. No one had moved. No wind strong enough to carve them. 7 steps in the sand, then gone. I felt the air grow heavy, pressing against my chest. Every hair on my arm stood up. And then the whisper again, close this time, right beside me. Do not fear, she is not gone. I turned toward the sound, but there was no one. Only the desert breathing slow beneath the stars. I lay back down, trembling, tears slipping from the corners of my eyes. Because in that moment, between fear and awe, I knew. Something was moving with us. Something that would not let us die here. That night, I didn't sleep. I watched the sky until dawn, waiting for whatever came next. Because somewhere in that vast silence, I realized heaven had found us again. And this time, it wasn't coming quietly. By sunrise, the wind had vanished completely. No movement, no sound. The desert lay still, as if the world itself had stopped breathing. The sky hung low and pale, a dull white that swallowed the horizon. It felt wrong, too quiet, too empty. Even the air had weight pressing against our lungs like stone. We rose slowly, gathering what little strength remained. Yusuf's voice cracked when he spoke. We can't stop now. But no one answered. There was nowhere left to go. The ridge, that cursed, distant ridge, still stood ahead, the same size, the same distance. I began to wonder if it even existed. If we were walking in circles, trapped inside the desert stream. By midday, the heat turned merciless again. Our shadows shrank until they disappeared. The ground beneath us glowed white-hot, shimmering with invisible fire. Every step sent a jolt of pain through our legs. We tried to ration hope, but even that ran dry. Abdul stumbled first. He fell hard, face first, into the sand, then rolled onto his back. His eyes stared up at the sky, empty, unblinking. I dropped beside him, shaking his shoulder. No response. His lips were cracked, his skin burned and blistered. I pressed my fingers to his throat. Nothing. Only silence. Yusuf began to wail a broken animal sound. The rest of us stood frozen. 2 gone now. 5 left. And the desert still stretching on like eternity. We buried him beside a dune, marking the spot with stones. But as soon as we stepped away, the wind picked up again, faint at first, then stronger. Within minutes, the sand erased his grave completely. Gone, like he had never existed. I fell to my knees, hands trembling. The anger came back, sharp, blinding. I shouted into the storm. Enough, do you hear me? Enough. The wind grew louder. Grains of sand lashed my face, cutting tiny wounds across my skin. I pressed my hands over my ears, but it wasn't just sound, it was inside me. A vibration, a voice buried beneath the roar. It wasn't human. It wasn't cruel. It was sorrowful. And it said, "Trust me." I gasped, staring into the wind, tears mixing with dust. "Trust you?" I shouted. After this, after all this, the wind didn't answer. It just swirled around me, cold and fierce, before fading back into stillness. When I turned, the others were staring, eyes wide, pale, frightened. They had heard it too. Yusuf whispered, "He's speaking to us." Tariq shook his head. "No, it's the heat. We're losing our minds." We didn't argue. There was nothing left to say. But none of us slept that night. The desert was alive, whispering, moving, breathing. Sometimes we saw faint lights in the distance, flickering like torches. Once, I thought I saw a figure again, tall, white, standing beyond the dunes. When I blinked, it vanished. But its presence lingered, heavy as gravity. By the 20th day, our bodies were wrecked. Skin cracked, lips split, eyes sunken in red. Each step a fight between will and collapse. Yusuf couldn't walk anymore. We carried him as far as we could, then laid him down in the shade of a rock. He smiled weakly, his voice barely a whisper. "Tell them I wasn't afraid." We begged him to hold on, but he only looked past us, his gaze fixed on something unseen. Then he said, "They're here," and exhaled one last time. We turned to see what he meant and froze. A storm, massive. A wall of dust stretching across the horizon, rising into the heavens. It moved fast, swallowing light, roaring like an army. The air turned electric. Static snapped across our skin. The sky darkened until the sun vanished completely. We ran, but there was nowhere to run. The storm hit with the force of an ocean. Sand whipped into our faces, our mouths, our lungs. We couldn't see, couldn't breathe. It was chaos, a violent, blinding chaos that felt almost alive. I fell to the ground, covering my head, shouting prayers into the wind, but the sound was swallowed whole. Then somewhere within that deafening storm came a voice. Clear, gentle, familiar. "Elias." I froze. It wasn't the storm speaking. It wasn't memory. It was real. Close. "I am here," the voice said. And then everything stopped. The wind halted mid-roar. The sand hung suspended in the air like frozen smoke. For a heartbeat, time itself stood still. I lifted my head, and the world had changed. The storm walls glowed faintly, gold and white, rippling like light underwater. A warmth filled the air, not heat, but presence. The kind that makes you fall to your knees without understanding why. I tried to speak, but no words came. The others knelt too, eyes wide, mouths open, in awe. We could feel it, the weight of something holy descending. And then, the voice again, not from above, from within. "You will not die here. The desert was never your end." A pulse of light spread across the dunes, washing over us like a wave. The sand beneath my hands turned cool. The air filled with a faint hum, the same heartbeat we'd felt before. And just like that, the storm was gone. Silence returned. The dunes were still. The air smelled clean, sweet like rain. When I looked down, I saw it again. Water. A small pool forming in the hollow beside us, clear as glass. And in its reflection, I saw a shape, faint, radiant, standing just behind me. I turned, but there was nothing, only the whisper of wind. And in that whisper, one final phrase. "Tell them heaven was listening." I fell to the ground and wept until the sky turned gold. Because in that moment, broken, lost, surrounded by death, We had seen proof that God had never left. The morning after the storm was the first morning that didn't feel like punishment. The air was cool, almost gentle. The sand glistened faintly under the rising sun, as if every grain had been washed clean. For the first time in 20 days, we weren't afraid to breathe. I woke to the sound of stillness, a sound so complete it almost sang. Tariq sat beside me, his eyes open, staring at the horizon. The others were motionless, too weak to speak, too exhausted to move, but there was peace on their faces. A strange, deep peace that I can't describe. I sat up slowly, blinking against the light. The pool of water from the night before was still there. Real. Untouched. I dipped my hands into it, expecting warmth, but it was cold. So cold, it burned. I drank, and for the first time since our capture, I felt strength return to my body. Not much, just enough. We took turns sipping from the pool, rationing every drop as if it were the blood of life itself. When the last of us had finished, we stood in silence. 7 had entered the desert. Now we were 4, and none of us could explain why we were still alive. The wind stirred softly, curling around us like breath. And for the first time, it carried direction faint but real. A pull, as if the desert itself was guiding us. I looked to the east. There, just beyond the dunes, the faint outline of hills shimmered in the distance. Real this time. I could feel it. We gathered what little strength we had left and started walking. No one spoke. Words had lost their use. We followed instinct, the rhythm of the wind, the unseen current that seemed to push us forward. Every few steps, I felt something, a presence just behind me, quiet but near. I didn't turn. I didn't need to. I knew it was the same voice that had spoken in the storm. The one that said, "You will not die here." Hours passed, but it didn't feel like time anymore. The desert had become timeless, an ocean of gold stretching into eternity. Every step felt both heavy and light, like walking between worlds. Then, sometime near dusk, Tariq stopped walking. He pointed ahead, his hand trembling. At first, I saw nothing, just heat and sand. But then movement, a figure walking toward us, small against the horizon, wrapped in a long robe, carrying a staff. He moved, slowly, calmly, unhurried, as if the desert belonged to him. We froze. No one dared to move. The figure drew closer, step by step. The air grew still, again, the kind of stillness that precedes revelation. When he was close enough, I could see his face. It was lined, weathered, eyes dark and kind. A shepherd, an old man, his beard white as salt, his expression calm. He looked at each of us, one by one, and smiled. I tried to speak, but my voice broke. Who are you?" He didn't answer right away. He looked at the sky, then back at us. Finally, he said, "You've been walking in circles." His voice was low, gentle, steady, the kind of voice that feels older than the man who speaks it. He pointed to the east. "Follow me." That was all he said. Then he turned, walking toward the hills. We hesitated. None of us wanted to trust a stranger, but something about him felt familiar. Not in memory, but in spirit. The same calm that had spoken in the wind, the same voice that had called my name. We followed. He didn't look back, didn't slow down, just kept walking. The sun lowered behind us, the dunes casting long, deep shadows. The light softened into gold, then into gray. Every few steps, he tapped his staff against the ground, leaving clear prints in the sand, footprints that did not fade, even as the wind brushed past them. When night fell, he stopped near a cluster of rocks that rose like teeth from the earth. "Rest here," he said. His eyes caught the faint glow of the moonlight, calm, unshaken. We sat too tired to question. The air smelled faintly of grass, though none grew there. And then, without another word, he vanished behind the rocks. We waited, Minutes, hours. No one spoke. Finally, I rose and followed where he had gone. But behind the rocks, there was nothing. Only sand, cold and untouched. No prints, no staff, no sign of anyone. I stood there, heart pounding, staring at the emptiness. Had we followed a mirage? A spirit? An angel? I didn't know. But when I turned back toward the others, I saw something I'll never forget. A narrow trail. Fresh footprints winding down the other side of the rocks, the exact direction he pointed toward earlier. And beyond it, faint lights flickering in the valley below. Real lights. Fire. Movement. Life. I fell to my knees, laughing and crying all at once. We weren't lost anymore. Something had led us home. I shouted for the others. They stumbled toward me, their faces lighting up as they saw what I saw. Hope, real hope, returned to their eyes. Tariq whispered. He said to follow, and so we did. We descended the narrow trail, following those impossible footprints through the night. The lights grew brighter, warmer. We could hear faint voices now, human voices shouting, calling, alive. The scent of smoke and food drifted through the air. We ran, tears streaming down our faces, hearts pounding with disbelief and relief. At the bottom of the valley, a small camp waited soldiers, their uniforms dusty, faces shocked as we stumbled into the firelight. One of them shouted, grabbing his radio. Another rushed forward, holding out a flask of water. I drank until I choked, coughing, laughing, weeping. And that's when I heard one of the soldiers say something that froze my blood. He said, we came here because one of our men had a dream. He saw 7 people in chains under a moon, and a voice told him to come. I dropped the flask, staring at him in silence, because I knew that voice. I had heard it too. In the dark, in the storm, in the desert that had swallowed us whole. And I knew now it was never the desert that had held us. It was heaven waiting to reveal itself. The soldiers surrounded us, faces pale with disbelief. Their leader, a young man with weary eyes, asked how long we'd been out there. 21 days, I said. He shook his head. That's impossible. I almost laughed. Yes, I whispered. It was. They gave us blankets, water, food, real food, but I couldn't eat. My hands shook too much to hold the cup. All I could do was stare at the fire, watching the flames dance in silence. The crackle, the smell of smoke, the warmth, they felt unreal, like we'd crossed from death into memory. The others fell asleep beside the fire, one by one. But I stayed awake, listening, because deep inside that stillness, I could feel it again, the same hum that had filled the desert. The same quiet awareness that had followed us through the storm, and I knew this wasn't finished. Near midnight, I rose quietly, stepping away from the camp. The soldiers' murmurs faded behind me. I followed the faint trail of prints that had led us there, the ones that hadn't faded even under the wind. They shimmered faintly under the moonlight, glowing just enough for me to follow. Each step drew me further into silence, until the world felt hollow and vast. Then, at the edge of the valley, I saw him again. The shepherd, standing where the dunes met the horizon. Still, calm, watching me. I froze. The wind stirred softly, lifting the edge of his robe. I tried to speak, but the words tangled in my throat. He raised a hand, a gesture not of command, but of peace. I felt it, the same calm that had filled the air before the storm, the same warmth that had carried the voice through the darkness. I took a step closer. He didn't move, just stood there, eyes kind and steady. I whispered, "Who are you?" He smiled faintly, and for a moment, the air around him shimmered, not bright, not blinding, but radiant, like light behind glass. He said one sentence, and it changed everything. "I was with you from the first day." The sound of his voice wasn't like speech. It was inside me, echoing through every breath, every heartbeat, every memory of thirst and fear and prayer. I wanted to fall to my knees, but my legs wouldn't move. He stepped closer, his feet leaving no prints in the sand. Every prayer you thought was lost, he said softly, I heard it. Every tear you thought vanished, he continued, was counted. I couldn't speak. The only sound was the wind, whispering through the dunes like breath through an open door. He stopped a few feet away. In the glow of the moonlight, I could see his face clearly now. Gentle, human, yet impossible to define, like every good face I had ever known blended into one. I whispered, why us? He tilted his head slightly, as if the question was both simple and sacred. Because you believed, even when you didn't. My heart broke. Every ounce of pride, every doubt, every complaint I had ever thrown toward heaven fell away like dust. Tears blurred my vision. I fell forward, hands in the sand, whispering, forgive me. He reached out, placing a hand on my shoulder, and when he touched me, I felt it. Not warmth, but life. Like every heartbeat I'd ever had was returning all at once. Every breath I'd lost given back in a single pulse. He said, the desert was never meant to destroy you. It was meant to show you what cannot die. I looked up, trembling. He smiled, not as a stranger, not as an angel, but as someone who had always been there. And in that moment, I realized this was no ordinary shepherd. This was the same presence that had called my name in the storm, the same voice that had whispered through the wind, the same hand that had led us to the water. I tried to ask where he would go now, but before I could speak, he turned toward the horizon. Light began to bloom behind him, not sunlight, not firelight, but something purer. It rippled outward, bathing the dunes in soft gold. And as I watched, he stepped into it. One step, then another, until he was gone. The light faded, leaving only starlight and the faint glow of dawn. I stood there for a long time, staring at the place where he had been. My hands still tingled from his touch. My heart felt alive again, not just beating alive. I whispered, thank you. And the wind answered gentle, almost playful, carrying the faint echo of laughter across the valley. When I returned to the camp, the soldiers were awake. Their leader rushed toward me. We were just about to send a team. Where did you go? I couldn't answer. I just smiled. Because even if I told him, he wouldn't understand. Some things aren't meant to be explained, only remembered. That morning, as the sun rose over the valley, one of the soldiers approached me, holding a flask. He said, we found something strange when we searched the ridge. He handed it to me. Inside was clear, cold water, but floating on its surface, a single white strand of wool. My hands trembled as I closed the lid. I looked toward the dunes, where light still touched the edge of the sky, and I whispered under my breath, he led us home. That was the last time I saw the shepherd. But every night since, when the wind moves just right, when the stars tremble against the black, I still hear that voice. Not far away, not above, but within, reminding me that even in the darkest places, heaven walks beside us. I didn't sleep after that night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that light again, soft, endless, alive. The kind of light that doesn't blind, it reveals. It fills every space inside you that you didn't know was empty. The soldier said we would be airlifted the next morning. But to me, it already felt like we'd been carried somewhere else. Not just out of the desert, but out of death itself. Before sunrise, I walked to the edge of the camp. The valley stretched wide below, quiet and golden, as if the earth itself was at peace. The sand still shimmered faintly where the shepherd had stood, and though I saw no footprints, I knew he had been real. I knelt there, whispering, why me, Lord? Why us? The wind moved gently across my face, warm, kind. And within that wind came the words I'll never forget. Because your story is not yours alone. You will speak for those who cannot. You will tell them that I still walk among the living. Tears burned down my cheeks. For 21 days, I had begged for water. Now I was drowning in mercy. When the helicopter arrived, the sound of its blades broke the stillness like thunder. We were rushed aboard, weak, half blind from the sun, but alive. As we lifted from the valley, I looked down one last time. The sand formed shapes, faint ridges and curves that almost looked like words. A pattern, a message only heaven could write. The flight to the base blurred together noise, motion, disbelief. Doctors moved around us, checking vitals, speaking in words that didn't seem to belong to our world anymore. One of them said, "It's impossible. 21 days in the desert, no shade, no water, they should be dead." Yusuf smiled faintly and whispered, "We were." They ran tests, wrote reports, took photographs, but no paper could explain what had happened. Because the proof wasn't in our bodies. It was in our eyes. We had seen something no human language could describe. When they asked me what I remembered, I told them the truth. Not the version they could publish, the real one. That a voice had led us through the storm. That an unseen hand had written light into the sand. That a shepherd had appeared in a place where no man could survive. And that, in the end, heaven itself had spoken. The officer interviewing me stared in silence. He wrote something down, then asked, "And what did he say?" I looked at him straight into his eyes and answered, "He said he still hears us, even when we think he's gone." He didn't know what to do with that. None of them did. They released us 2 days later, calling it a miraculous survival. But they couldn't know what it really was. It wasn't survival. It was resurrection. When we returned home, people wanted to hear the story. Reporters, churches, strangers. But I stayed silent for a long time, because how do you describe something that lives inside light? How do you tell people that God walked beside you not in dreams but in dust and sand? Weeks passed. The nightmare stopped, but the voice never left. Sometimes at night, when everything was quiet, I'd hear again that same gentle tone. Not commanding, just reminding. Tell them I am still near. So I began to write, not to prove, not to preach, but to remember, because memory fades, but truth does not. And this truth burned itself into me like fire. On the 20th night after our rescue, I woke suddenly, the room filled with a faint glow. Not bright, not blinding, the same soft radiance I had seen in the desert. I sat up, trembling, whispering, "Is it you?" No answer. Only light. But in that light, I saw images, flashes, pieces of something larger. I saw faces, thousands of them. Men and women from every nation, crying out, praying in silence, thinking no one was listening. And above them, the same presence, listening, waiting, answering in ways they couldn't yet see. Then the vision changed. I saw a great expanse, not sky, not earth, but something between. It shimmered like water and breathed like wind. And across it moved figures clothed in light, carrying what looked like seeds made of flame. They dropped them over the earth, and wherever they landed, light grew small at first, then spreading like dawn. I heard the voice again. Not loud, not distant, inside. This is what faith does. It plants light where death once lived. The vision faded, the light dimmed, and I was left sitting there, tears wet on my face, whispering, "Lord, what do you want me to do?" The answer came as a whisper in my chest. Tell them what you saw, not to prove me, but to remind them I am still here. And so I did. I told my story, not perfectly, not heroically, just honestly. Because faith isn't about surviving the desert. It's about realizing you were never walking alone. Even now, years later, when I close my eyes, I can still see it, that valley, that light, that presence. And I know he didn't just deliver us from the desert, he delivered us from doubt. I never asked for this story. And even now, I can't tell it without shaking. Because every word brings me back to that place, the heat, the silence, the sand that swallowed our names. But if heaven allowed me to live, then silence would be disobedience. So I speak not because I'm worthy, but because I was found. People ask me what it felt like to stand that close to death. The truth is, death wasn't frightening. It was familiar, quiet, patient, almost gentle. What terrified me was the idea that I could die without ever having known him for real. Not through sermons, not through tradition, but face to face. When I saw that light, the one that moved like wind and sang like fire, I didn't see a throne or angels or choirs. I saw mercy, pure breathing mercy. It didn't demand anything. It didn't condemn. It simply was. And in its presence, every sin I had ever buried rose up and melted away like ice under the sun. That's when I realized something that changed everything. God doesn't wait for us to be holy to find us. He meets us in the dirt, in the valley, in the broken places where faith has bled dry. That's where he speaks the loudest. When I came home, I thought I'd rest, but rest never came. Everywhere I went, people wanted to know about the miracle, about the storm, the voice, the shepherd. They wanted proof. They wanted signs. And I wanted to give them something they could hold. But the truth isn't something you hold. It's something that holds you. So when they asked me, what did he look like? I said, like every kindness you ever ignored. When they asked, what did he sound like? No. I said, like peace, finally finding your name. And when they asked, why you? I said, because I was lost. The miracle wasn't the water. It wasn't surviving 21 days without food. It wasn't even being found by soldiers who were sent through a dream. The real miracle was that in a world drowning in noise, I finally learned how to hear him whisper. And that's the message he left me with. Simple, heavy, beautiful. He said, tell them the door is still open. Tell them I have not changed. Tell them I still walk where they least expect. Me, in deserts, in prisons, in hearts that have stopped believing. Those words have lived in me ever since. They echo when I wake. They steady me when I doubt. They burn when I'm silent too long. I've seen miracles since then, not the kind that make headlines, but the quiet ones. A child healed when the doctors had given up. A man forgiving the one who took everything from him. A woman choosing faith over despair. Small lights planted in dark soil, growing slow and steady. Each one proof that heaven hasn't turned its face away. Sometimes people tell me they don't believe in God. I smile gently because I understand. There was a time I didn't either. Not truly. I believe in the idea of God, not the presence of him. Until the day I ran out of strength, out of hope, out of breath, and found him waiting in the sand. If you're listening to this, maybe you've been walking through your own desert. Maybe your prayers have gone silent and your hope feels thin. Listen to me carefully. The silence doesn't mean he's gone. It means he's closer than you realize. And sometimes the voice of God doesn't shout. Sometimes it breaks through as thirst, as longing, as the ache that refuses to die. And if that's you, then you are not forgotten. You are being called. I remember his final words to me, spoken not in thunder, but in stillness. Tell them I was never far. That's why I'm telling you now. Not as a preacher, not as a survivor, but as a witness. Because what I saw, what I heard, it wasn't just for me. It was for everyone who's still searching for proof that heaven sees them. You are seen. You are heard. And you are loved more fiercely than you could ever imagine. That's the message I was sent to deliver. And if you're hearing it now, it means it's for you. If this story stirred something in you, don't walk away from it. Don't scroll past and forget. Take a moment, close your eyes, and whisper, even if your voice shakes, I believe, because belief is the first drop of water in every desert. And that's how I know heaven still intervenes. Heaven still speaks, and he still walks among the living. The world has a way of forgetting stories like ours. It moves fast, scrolls past, changes channels, and yet every time the wind moves across the desert, I know heaven hasn't forgotten. I used to think the miracle was that we survived 21 days without water. But now I understand the real miracle was what happened after, when my faith, cracked and empty, began to breathe again. When the silence became a sanctuary instead of a curse. When I realized that every unanswered prayer was actually being carried word for word by a God who had never stopped listening. If you've come this far in my story, I don't believe it's by chance. You were meant to hear this. Because maybe you're standing in your own desert right now. Dry, tired, unseen, wondering if heaven even remembers your name. And I'm here to tell you, it does. He remembers. He still answers. He still speaks through storms, through silence, through the small mercies that come when you least expect them. The same voice that whispered to me in the sand is whispering to you now. Hold on, you are not forgotten. You don't need to be perfect to hear him. You don't need to be holy to be found. You just need to whisper, even once, God, if you are real, show me. And he will. Maybe not in lightning, not in visions, not in angels, but in the quiet way light fills a room after a long night. In the peace that comes when you finally stop running, if you felt that stirring while listening, that's not emotion, that's recognition. That's heaven reminding you where you came from. You were never meant to die in the desert. You were meant to be found. So before you leave, take a moment. Don't rush. Let silence sit with you. And if your heart is still beating, it's because there's still time. Whisper it. I believe, not for me, not for this story, but for the one who still walks where we fall, the one who turns dust into breath and despair into deliverance. Because somewhere tonight, another soul is crying out in the dark, and maybe your faith will be the light that guides them home. So share this story, not as proof, but as hope. A reminder that miracles still happen and heaven is still listening. This is Elias Rahim, and I'm still here. Not because I survived the desert, but because grace found me in it. And if he found me there, he can find you too.